Namaskar and welcome to Sansad Television. I am Vishal Dahiya and you're watching our show Perspective, where we bring you the detailed analysis of key issues. Now today we're going to talk about Prime Minister Narendra Modi's US visit and the key takeaways from there. In fact, Prime Minister Modi has just concluded his visit to the United States of America, during which he held bilateral meetings with his Australian and Japanese counterparts and US President Joe Biden, along with his Deputy Vice President Kamala Harris. Now, Prime Minister Modi also participated in the Quad Leaders Summit in Washington, D.C. and addressed the United Nations General Assembly in New York before heading home. In his much-awaited address at UNGA, Prime Minister Modi raised several key issues, including regional security, rule-based world order, and the need for corrective measures to strengthen the effectiveness and reliability of United Nations organization. Now, referring to the ongoing situation in Afghanistan, he stressed on the need to ensure that there is no use of Afghanistan's land for terror activities, specifically by those nations who use terrorism as a political tool. Now, terming oceans as our shared resources, Prime Minister Modi also urged for the steps to strengthen the rule-based order there, and pointing out that India has played a very key and significant role in combating at global level COVID pandemic. He stressed on the need for diversifying the world economy in the given scenario, specifically in the post-pandemic world. And earlier during the Quad Leaders Summit, all the leaders recognized the COVID pandemic as the most immediate threat to lives and livelihoods in the whole world and pledged to debit at least 1.2 billion vaccine doses globally to be donated, in addition to the doses which are already financed through COVAX. Now, they also decided to give a boost to the health security aspect and support the call for a global pandemic radar. All four Quad nations also announced a number of steps in various key areas, such as launching the Quad Infrastructure Coordination Group and Semiconductor Supply Chain Initiative, formation of a green shipping network, sharing of satellite data to protect Earth and its waters, work towards resilience against cyber threats, and enabling cyber security atmosphere as well, along with sustainable development. We'll discuss and analyze all these key takeaways from Prime Minister Modi's US visit. But let's begin first with his address as UNGA and listening to some key points made by him there.
रिग्रेसिव थिंकिंग के साथ जो देश आतंकवाद का पॉलिटिकल टूल के रूप में इस्तेमाल कर रहे हैं, उन्हें ये समझना होगा कि आतंकवाद उनके लिए भी उतना ही बड़ा खतरा है। ये सुनिश्चित किया जाना बहुत जरूरी है कि अफगानिस्तान की धरती का इस्तेमाल आतंकवाद फैलाने और आतंकी हमलों के लिए न हो। हमें इस बात के लिए भी सतर्क रहना होगा कि वहां की नाजुक स्थितियों का कोई देश अपने स्वार्थ के लिए एक टूल की तरह इस्तेमाल करने की कोशिश न करें। संयुक्त राष्ट्र को खुद को प्रासंगिक बनाए रखना है तो उसे अपनी इफेक्टिवनेस को सुधारना होगा, रिलायबिलिटी को बढ़ाना होगा। यूएन पर आज कई तरह के सवाल खड़े हो रहे हैं। इन सवाल को हमने क्लाइमेट क्राइसिस में देखा है, कोविड के दौरान देखा है, दुनिया के कई हिस्सों में चल रही प्रॉक्सी वॉर, आतंकवाद और अभी अफगानिस्तान के संकट ने इन सवालों को और गहरा कर दिया है। ये आवश्यक है कि हम यूएन को ग्लोबल ऑर्डर, ग्लोबल लॉ और ग्लोबल वैल्यूज के संरक्षण के लिए निरंतर सुदृढ़ करें।
There it is. We heard the Prime Minister making those two emphatic points at the United Nations General Assembly in his address. And to understand all these aspects in a much better way and analyze what does it actually mean. We have with us a distinguished panel of experts. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with Professor Pant is joining us. He is a distinguished fellow and head of ORF's strategic studies. We are also joined by two more guests. Pramit Chaudhuri, Foreign Affairs Editor of Hindustan Times, is joining us. And we also have Mr. Akil Berry. He is Director of South Asia Initiatives and Asia Society Policy Institute. Welcome, all of you gentlemen. Let me begin with you, Professor Pant, and let's start by analyzing that emphatic statement which we just heard from the Prime Minister, not mincing the words at all on these two issues. One, regional security, which was the situation in Afghanistan, and two, the rule-based world order when we're talking about oceans.
Yes, I think they have become now very important from India's perspective and from global perspective. The idea that you have two sets of problems, and on India's two fronts. On the one hand, at the one end of the spectrum, on the western front, you have Pakistan, and now in Afghanistan, situation is taking its toll. On the eastern flank, of course, you have the larger issue of what Prime Minister referred to as expansionism in the oceans, and which is clearly directed at China. So I think the two sets of challenges, which are now global challenges, they are not simply India's challenge. And of course, they pertain to Indian foreign policy, Indian national security. But I think what Prime Minister was underscoring was that it is important for the international community sitting in that august body of the United Nations to look at these problems in a much more expansive way, so that no one country feels the brunt of them. And when he spoke about the Western, the challenge of terrorism, the challenge of Afghanistan, what is happening in Afghanistan and how it needs to be managed, I think that the clarion call was very explicit that it has to be the international community's responsibility, not only to help ordinary Afghans, but also to ensure that Afghan soil is not used for terror purposes. So I think he very cleverly melded Indian national interests with the larger imperative in front of global community.
Okay, and indeed, when we're talking about global community, the multilateral bodies like United Nations as well, which you're referring in terms of effectiveness and reliability, strengthening that aspect. We'll come to that as well. But Pramit, your views there, and we were earlier discussing, 2-3 days ago, how these two are key issues, important concerns India has, and the Prime Minister has, put them effectively on the world stage there for all the other leaders to listen into and debate and find a way out.
Yeah, look, I think the Prime Minister, when he spoke, basically tried to send a message at 2 or 3 different levels. The one message I think that was for the global audience was that, look, India, as far as COVID is concerned, as far as vaccines are concerned, and even global issues like climate and so on, India is back. That after having disappeared for a while because of our own problems with the Delta variant, we are now we're back to producing, exporting vaccines, and we are part of the solutions to the global issues of the world. He also brought in, I noticed, and you may have noticed that he noticed that we spoke in English, that democracy can deliver. Democracy has delivered, just something he's very clearly absorbed or echoing what the Quad is all about. And I think that's the sort of global area that he spoke about. He brings in the Quad, and then he talks about that, look, I have a local problem, which is Afghanistan, Pakistan. And this is an old problem as far as we're concerned on the terrorism front. World shouldn't forget about this. And the Taliban regime has done absolutely nothing in its actions to deserve recognition. And we need to be very careful about this. And ultimately, implicitly in what he said, is that their ultimate backers are Pakistan, a country with an incredible record of terrorism.
Okay. Indeed, those are very emphatic words coming in from Prime Minister Modi there at the world stage. Let me also bring in Mr. Akil Berry here, joining us from United States. Mr. Berry, you would have very closely watched the entire visit of Prime Minister Modi to United States. In terms of the way you view it, how do you think the key takeaways which we're talking about here, and how do you think whatever transpired, be the bilateral meetings with his Japanese or Australian counterparts, or US President Joe Biden, and the Quad Summit, and capping it all with the address at the UNGA?
Well, I think, first off, thank you so much for having me on today. I think it's very reflective of the partnership that the US and India have had over the past 20 years. We've seen a steady strengthening of the bilateral relationship, first starting with President Clinton's visit to India in 2000. Then President Bush comes in with the nuclear deal in 2008. President Obama is the first U.S. president to visit India twice during his tenure. President Trump starts the Quad initiative again, and now we've arrived at the first ever Quad Leaders Summit in person. And so I think that's really reflective of kind of the bet that India and the U.S. have made on each other. For the U.S., they see India as a strong bulwark against China and a key part of the Indo-Pacific, whereas for India, Prime Minister Modi knows that India's economy and India cannot grow without investments from the U.S., investments from U.S. companies. I mean, if you take a look at the CEOs he met with, and it was very strategic of who he met with. He met with the CEO of First Solar. India is trying to increase solar panel manufacturing, and indeed, in the fact sheet, First Solar announced more new manufacturing initiative in India. Blackstone, as the government tries to focus on the asset monetization pipeline. So I think Prime Minister Modi and all the leaders kind of recognize that by working together, they can kind of create an alternative to China in the region, which is really what this is about. It's a set of common issues pushing these countries together.
Okay. Professor Pant, let's pick it up from where Mr. Bery has left it in terms of when we are looking at this global strategic partnership between both India and United States of America, and there are a lot of common elements there as well in terms of what transpired or what goes on bilaterally between India and United States, what Prime Minister said at UNGA, and what actually the Quad leaders also discussed.
Yes, I think that, and I think that's very interesting part of this visit, because this visit primarily was about participating in the Quad summit. We are used to looking at the Prime Minister's visit to the US largely through the bilateral prism, but I think this was more about the Quad summit and how it got reflected in various things that he did, bilateral engagement with the US as well as what he said at the UN General Assembly. So I think there's a constant theme throughout his visit, and which was showcasing India's ability to deliver, that governance, that democracy is working, that we are a work in progress. With all our challenges, we have delivered on a number of fronts, including the global health crisis, where India was one of the few countries from the very beginning that had been saying that it's a global problem requiring a global solution, and India is at the very heart of it now, with Quad coming up with its vaccine initiative, and with America trying to make this part of the relationship very robust. So I think what he has done in his multiple engagements and capping it all with the UN General Assembly address is to showcase what India is able to do as a provider of solutions, rather than as a country that cribs about the challenges it faces. Here is a country that is providing solutions and inviting the rest of the world to participate in that journey, whether it was the CEOs in America, or whether it was this clarion call at the UN General Assembly saying, come to India and invest in India, and we will be making vaccines in India and other things in India. So let's go on in that journey. So I think that was a very impressive arc of his engagements in the US, from bilateral to multilateral to from bilateral to quadrilateral, and then to the larger multilateral framework at the UN General Assembly.
Indeed, and a lot of common elements there, and those common elements are in fact very, very important and significant as well. Pramit, I'd like to bring you in here, and if we have to look at what transpired in the Quad Leaders Summit, and also closely look at Prime Minister's address at UNGA. Two common threads. One, vis-a-vis dealing with the COVID pandemic, how to go ahead and push for a vaccine distribution across the world. And also the second element is the rule-based world order statement which he made vis-a-vis oceans. And the Quad Leaders Summit also, there's a lot of talk about ensuring a green shipping network and obviously a focus on Indo-Pacific region.
Yeah, I think the Quad, one of the key things that the Quad leaders have been trying to emphasize is that the Quad is deliberately not a military relationship. The military part of it is separate. That's a set of bilateral, trilateral agreements, the Malabar exercises, deliberately kept at a distance. The Quad is about addressing a much more fundamental issue, which is that you're now seeing China develop, in effect, an alternative world order that is built around autocracy, surveillance, and so on. And that therefore the democracies represented by the Quad and other countries outside of the Quad need to be showing that they can respond and handle global solutions and problems. And so therefore, yes, the number one, obviously, global problem today is COVID.
Okay.
And therefore, Quad is looking at the vaccine, which was a bit delayed, but now will be back in play. And this is the easiest, most tangible deliverable for the Quad right now. But it's important to look, if you look at the Quad fact sheet, the Quad statements that have come out, the incredible emphasis on technology.
Indeed.
They recognize that the commanding heights of the future are going to be things like artificial intelligence, 5G, and so on. And that the Quad, plus other countries, and this I think to emphasize, the Quad is designed to be extremely flexible, because if you're going to do, let's say, semiconductors, the Quad is not enough. You need to bring in Taiwan, you need to bring in South Korea, you need to bring each of these technologies requires a different set of countries.
Okay.
The Quad can anchor, but the idea is simply that we are going to produce a set of coalitions that are designed to ensure that the China-centric world does not dominate.
Okay. So various key focus areas there when we're talking about the Quad initiative as well. Mr. Berry, one more statement specifically, if you're looking at what Prime Minister Modi said at UNGA, one aspect of it was where he mentioned that the need is to diversify the world economy in a post-COVID world. And therein comes the importance of trade and investment linkages. And you were mentioning earlier how this is a very important part of India-US partnership. So the same stands for other countries, other nations as well. So how do you see things moving from here onwards when we're talking about trade, investment and diversification of economy?
So if you kind of look at one of the key statements of the Quad Leaders Summit, it is about supply chain resiliency and diversifying the supply chain. Even in the joint statement between the US and India, they said that they want to hold the Trade Policy Forum, which brings together Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal and US Trade Representative Catherine Tai to discuss these trade issues. If you remember, during the Trump administration, the Modi government and the Trump administration came close to a trade deal, but ultimately it fell short at the finish line. Even in Prime Minister Modi's bilateral meeting with President Biden, he mentioned trade, which is a pretty significant deal. And as kind of India pivots towards negotiating deals with the UK, with the EU, with Australia, with the UAE, and also with the US, I think trade is going to be an important part of the conversation going forward. And as kind of what Pramit was saying is that all these countries need to kind of work together, and they're trying to create an alternative, democracies versus autocracies. Okay. And trade is going to be an important part of that democratic pitch.
Okay. Indeed, emerging technologies, which Pramit was also earlier mentioning, and diversification of economy, the clarion call which you referred to, Professor Pant. If you have to look at all these issues in a nutshell, then what Prime Minister Modi was trying to convey was that we as a country are ready for more trade and investment. We have the conducive environment, and the need right now is to diversify the world economy, and India is all set and ready to play that larger role there.
Yes, I think a very, very important message on that count across his various engagements, that India is ready for business. And I think also capping it up at in his UN General Assembly speech, saying that, look, the institutional fabric of the world order is not prepared for it. So I think if you bring them all together, you get the message that like India should be there. India is doing all it can to help the world at times of crisis. India is there as a provider of solutions. India is willing to reorient itself given the challenges that the world is facing, including on technology front, including on supply chain resilience. But the institutional fabric is not yet ready. And I think very cleverly over the last few years, Prime Minister has put the onus on the UN itself. Rather than, it used to be the traditional model, India saying, bring us in, bring us in. Now he says, it is your responsibility to reform yourself. Because if you don't, your credibility goes down. It doesn't affect us. We are doing what we can for the international community. But ultimately, the onus is on you to reform yourself, to make it more credible and more reliable. And I think that's a very, very important message at this point in time, to be going out from India, that India is not closing itself India is prepared to engage with the rest of the world, but India is doing that on its own terms. And I think that's a very important and vibrant message that comes out from Prime Minister's speech at multiple levels, and especially at the UN General Assembly.
Okay, indeed, and that's an issue which India has flagged time and again, that there is a need for reforms at these multilateral forums, specifically United Nations. And he did refer to those two examples about, the origin of the COVID virus as well as the way entire situation has been handled there in Afghanistan. So that apart, if you're looking at the other aspect of these partnerships or these linkages or the common elements, one very important thing here is the emerging technologies. When we're talking about emerging technologies, the related aspects are the 5G technologies, resilience against the cyber threats. Now, that's a very, very important aspect, and it has found mention in the Quad Leaders Summit as well. Quite a lot of focus there.
Lots of focus, because I think the countries, the nations now realize that that's going to be where the geopolitical contestation is going to take place. And unless like-minded countries are willing to contribute more, willing to work with each other more, the other side can win the game. And I think increasingly, as you look to the fourth industrial revolution, you look at the emerging technologies, who is going to ace this game? And I think that's the big question. Terrorism is one side, maritime security is on the other. But ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, what we are looking at is the next stage of globalization is going to be determined by who controls the technological frontiers. And in that context, getting help from like-minded countries, partnering with them, absorbing that technology, and also developing the local base for innovation. And I think that's where what the Quad has done is to give these scholarships to students, which is a very important initiative, I think,
Indeed,
in the long term to develop that base within India and in other countries. But I think by and large, what we are looking at is technology and geotech becoming the central nodal point of conversation and contestation.
Okay. Let me bring in Mr. Bery as well for a concluding comment from him. Mr. Bery, in your view, when we are talking about these emerging technologies, and you referred to it earlier as well, it becomes really important, specifically in the cybersecurity domain.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think we've seen already some coordination between the countries. For example, when India announced which companies could participate in its 5G trials, Huawei was notably excluded from that. Even though Huawei had participated in India's 3G and 4G network, it's not going to be a part of India's 5G infrastructure. And I think that's really important going forward, because it shows that, Western countries, that's also why Prime Minister Modi met with Qualcomm. And this was also a part of the conversation between in the Quad about how can we kind of invest in critical technologies? How can we, and there's also this Quad principles on technology design, development, governance, and use, which talks about affirming the ways that technology is designed and developed and used and shaped by our shared democratic values and respect for universal human rights. I think that's going to be a really important guiding document going forward, especially as we focus on the critical technologies and kind of think through how can the Quad countries come together to kind of promote these and develop these critical technologies.
Okay, indeed, critical technologies is a very, very important cornerstone of those partnerships, bilateral, multilateral, and quadrilateral as well, when we're talking about Quad Leaders Summit. Can we comment from you, Professor Pant, before we bring this discussion to an end, in terms of understanding and summarizing Prime Minister Modi's visit to US and as we are terming it, key takeaways?
I think the key takeaway is that India is making it very clear to the world that while India is pursuing Atmanirbharta, while India is pursuing self-reliance, it does not mean that India is closing itself like in the past. This means that India wants to become a nodal actor in global supply chains. It wants to become a nodal actor in the way maritime community is harnessed for its own interests and for the interests of the global community, and the way it is prepared now to deliver as a provider of solutions rather than as a country that points out the problems. So I think that has been a dramatic transformation in that sense, and also engaging countries on the basis of issues. This old paradigm that we are non-aligned no longer works. We are now openly saying we are aligned based on issues. And I think the Quad Summit was a very, very important takeaway in that respect, that now that in-person summit has happened, Leader Summit has happened, Quad is only going to grow from here. whatever the Chinese may say, they've said it will dissipate like a sea of foam. It
Indeed.
has not. It has grown, and hopefully with the muscle that has been put now behind Quad, it seems that it is going to go further ahead. And the fact that Biden administration has called this within 6 months, 2 summits, underscores the reality for the world. And I think the Prime Minister's message was very clear that India should be playing a very, very proactive role as the changing strategic realities in the Indo-Pacific evolve in a particular direction.
Okay, there it is. Thank you so much, Professor Harsh Pant. And I'd also like to thank Pramit and Akil Berry there for sharing your views with us and our viewers. As our experts were pointing out, there it is, the summary of Prime Minister Modi's visit to United States of America, wherein bilateral meetings were held, multilateral forum address at UNGA by Prime Minister, and obviously that Quad Leaders Summit. Quite a lot of issues being discussed and a roadmap being also chalked out for all key aspects there, be it regional security, be it the rule-based order in Indo-Pacific, the development of Indo-Pacific, and obviously dealing with the fallout of COVID pandemic, critical technologies, emerging technologies there, and India putting itself there at the world stage and saying that yes, we are ready to play a larger role in the world affairs. We've done it successfully and we can do it again. We'll come back again on Monday with a different topic. Till then, keep watching Sansad Television. Thank you.